I knew something was wrong before I even pulled into the driveway, because there was dust hanging in the air where there shouldn't have been any. You ever get that feeling, like your stomach notices trouble before your brain catches up? Yeah, that was me that evening. I turned off County Route 18, rolled past my mailbox, and just froze there behind the steering wheel. Right across the front section of my property, my land. The same 14 acres I'd spent nearly 15 years paying taxes on, mowing, fencing, maintaining. There was a brand new gravel road cut straight through the field like somebody had dragged a knife across it. Fresh, crushed limestone, compacted hard by heavy equipment, tire tracks everywhere. And at the far end of it, disappearing toward the back ridge, were construction trucks hauling lumber into the property behind mine like they owned the place. And the crazy part? Nobody had said a word to me. Not a call, not a letter, not even some fake apology taped to my gate pretending to ask forgiveness after the fact. Nothing. Just a road. Through my land. Like I was some invisible obstacle they figured they could bulldoze around. Now to understand why this mattered, you gotta picture the layout out there. My property sat between the state highway and a huge, undeveloped tract behind me, around 50 acres or so, mostly woods and rolling dirt hills. When I bought my place back in 2009, the whole area was sleepy, quiet, blue-collar farmland. Folks minded their business. You waved at your neighbors, fixed your fences, maybe complained about the weather over gas station coffee. That was about it. But then developers started creeping in from the city, chasing cheap land and promising luxury communities to people who'd never survive one muddy season out there. The guy who bought the back parcel was named Bryce Tanner. Real polished type. White SUV, expensive boots that never touched actual dirt, teeth so perfect they looked rented. I'd seen him once or twice from a distance talking to survey crews, but he never introduced himself. That should have been my first clue right there. Because decent people introduce themselves before they start changing the landscape around your home. Anyway, I parked the truck and walked the length of that gravel road myself, maybe a quarter-mile from the highway all the way through the edge of my pasture. The grading work was professional too, drainage ditch cut on one side, compacted base layer underneath, fresh stakes marking utility lines. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was planned. Somebody had looked at my property, decided I was inconvenient, and moved ahead anyway. I remember standing there with my boots sinking into loose gravel thinking. These people genuinely believed I wouldn't fight back. That part got under my skin more than the road itself. So I called the number posted on the giant sign near the entrance. Coming soon, Cedar Creek Estates. Some corporate fantasy name slapped onto what used to be cow pasture. Bryce answered on the second ring, sounding weirdly relaxed, like we were old buddies. I said, "You got crews driving through my property right now." And this man actually chuckled. Then he goes, "Oh, that temporary access road? Yeah, we're only using it during early construction. Shouldn't be a big issue." I swear, developers talk like every problem becomes reasonable if they say it calmly enough. I told him flat out, "You built a road across land you do not own." He paused for maybe half a second before switching into that fake professional tone. Our site engineer believed that section may have been part of an abandoned easement. See, that right there is corporate language for we hoped you wouldn't check. Because I already knew there was no easement. When I bought the property, the title company went through everything with a microscope. Clean deed. No utility access. No shared driveway agreement. Nothing. From a legal perspective, easements don't magically appear because a developer wants a cheaper route. But Bryce kept talking over me like I was the unreasonable one. "Look," he said, "this subdivision is going to increase local property values, bring infrastructure into the area, help the entire community." And there it was, the arrogance. That beautiful little developer mindset where they convince themselves profit equals public service. I told him to remove the road immediately. His tone changed after that. Less polished. Sharper. He said, "Let's not make this difficult." That sentence sat with me all night because what he really meant was, "We already invested money into crossing your land, so now we expect you to surrender quietly to save us inconvenience." This is a psychological trap a lot of regular homeowners fall into. People with money move fast, act confident, create momentum, and they hope you'll doubt yourself long enough for their actions to become permanent. And honestly, for a minute, standing there looking at all that equipment rolling through my field, I did feel overwhelmed. There were dump trucks coming in every 10 minutes. Excavators. Concrete forms stacked near the ridge. Entire crews working behind my property like a small city was being born back there. Meanwhile, I was just one guy with a fence line and a mortgage. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Because this wasn't just about gravel or traffic. It was about disrespect. About somebody deciding ownership only mattered when rich people said it did. The next morning, before sunrise, I walked back out there with coffee in my hand and watched another convoy of trucks bounce across that road they built on my land. Drivers didn't even slow down anymore. They acted comfortable already. Familiar. Like they'd mentally absorbed my property into theirs overnight. That was the moment I stopped seeing it as a misunderstanding and started seeing it as a test. Bryce Tanner thought he understood leverage. He thought because he had investors, attorneys, contractors, schedules, permits, and political connections, eventually I'd cave under pressure. What he didn't realize was, I grew up around stubborn farmers. And stubborn farmers will spend twice as much money as necessary just to make sure a bully loses. Now let me pause the story for a second because this part matters more than people realize. A lot of folks hear a situation like this and think, well, if the road was temporary, maybe it wasn't worth fighting over. That mindset is exactly how people lose property rights without noticing it until it's too late. According to standard procedure, access rights are supposed to be negotiated before construction ever begins, not after trucks are already rolling through somebody's pasture. Pretending ownership is optional. Developers know this. Engineers know this. County planners definitely know this. Which means when somebody skips that process, it usually isn't an accident. It's a calculated gamble. They're betting the homeowner either won't understand the law, won't afford legal action, or won't tolerate the stress long enough to resist. And honestly, that pressure campaign works all the time. From a legal perspective, the dangerous thing wasn't even the gravel road itself. It was the ongoing use. Because if somebody continuously accesses your land and you don't challenge it, things can get messy later depending on local property law, implied access arguments, easement claims, all kinds of headaches nobody wants attached to their deed. That's why documenting everything early matters. Photos, dates, emails, formal notices. Paper trails save people. Emotion doesn't. And psychologically, Bryce was using a classic dominance move. He acted calm, confident, slightly dismissive, because confident people make others second-guess themselves. This is a psychological trap. If somebody behaves like they already own the situation, your brain starts wondering whether maybe they do, especially when they've got crews, equipment, and legal jargon flying around. The lesson here is, never confuse confidence with authority. Some people sound powerful simply because nobody has challenged them before. And trust me, Bryce Tanner was about to get challenged. So the morning after my lawyer sent the formal cease and desist letter, I honestly expected at least some kind of slowdown. Maybe fewer trucks. Maybe a phone call from somebody higher up trying to smooth things over. Nope. Bryce doubled down instead. By Friday, traffic across my land had actually increased. Concrete mixers were rumbling through before 7 a.m. Framers had started unloading lumber near the ridge, and somebody even installed temporary construction lighting along the access path, like they were planning to stay a while. That part almost made me laugh because the confidence was unbelievable. It was like watching a guy continue setting up lawn chairs on somebody else's porch after being told to leave. Every time I looked outside, there were more workers, more noise, more dust blowing across my fence line. And the wild thing? Most of the crew probably had no idea they were trespassing. To them it was just another job site. But Bryce knew. His attorneys knew. They were gambling on momentum. See, construction projects run on timelines. Delays cost money. Investors get nervous. Contractors start charging penalties. Bryce thought if he pushed the project far enough ahead before court intervention, the judge might hesitate to stop everything. Again, classic pressure tactic. Build first, apologize later. Except my attorney wasn't impressed by any of it. Her name was Denise Harper, former county litigation attorney, tough as railroad steel and about as warm as January concrete. She looked over the photos I took, the survey maps, the deed records, then leaned back in her chair and said, "He's either arrogant, desperate, or stupid. Maybe all three." We filed for trespass and emergency injunctive relief that same afternoon. And let me tell you something about courthouse confidence. It evaporates real fast when judges start asking direct questions. Bryce showed up to the hearing in a tailored Navy suit carrying 3 folders and the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. His attorney did most of the talking. According to them, the rear parcel had limited practical access alternatives, and my field represented the most economically reasonable temporary construction route. I still remember the wording because it sounded so sanitized, like stealing becomes acceptable if you phrase it like a business proposal. Denise stood up next and absolutely dismantled them. She walked the judge through the property map step by step, showed the clean title report, then pointed out something Bryce's team conveniently ignored. They had never even attempted to negotiate access before entering my land. Not once. No offer. No request. No compensation discussion. They skipped the entire process because they assumed they could pressure me afterward. The courtroom got real quiet after that. Then the judge leaned back in his chair and said something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. Practical does not equal permitted. Simple. Clean. Brutal. Bryce's expression changed immediately. You could actually see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The judge issued an immediate order prohibiting further use of my property, demanding removal of the gravel roadway within 14 days and restoration of the land to its prior condition. 14 days. Honestly, if Bryce had complied right then, he probably could have salvaged the situation with manageable losses. But ego makes people do expensive things. Instead of removing the road, they stalled. 14 days passed, then 15. The gravel stayed. Tire tracks stayed. Equipment kept showing up near the boundary like they were testing whether I'd actually enforce the order. That was Bryce's final mistake. Denise filed enforcement paperwork the very next morning, and meanwhile, I decided to solve the practical side of the problem myself. I called a local fencing contractor I knew named Wade. Old school ranch guy, barely spoke 5 words unless necessary. I told him I needed the strongest agricultural gate he could install across the entrance point from the highway. His only response was, "How angry are you?" I said, "Scale of 1 to 10? He nodded. Yeah. 2 days later, Wade showed up with steel posts thick enough to survive a tornado. We sunk them into concrete nearly 4 feet deep, welded reinforced hinges onto a heavy tubular gate, and installed an industrial lock system that looked better suited for a military checkpoint than a pasture entrance. Then, just inside my property line, we dug a shallow trench running perpendicular to the gravel strip so trucks couldn't simply drive around the gate through the grass. Nothing illegal, nothing aggressive, just absolute denial of access. And I'm not gonna lie, watching that gate swing shut for the first time felt incredible. Not because I enjoy conflict, but because for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt control returning. The next morning was pure chaos. Around 6:15 a.m., the first dump truck rolled up from the highway, stopped at the locked gate, then sat there idling. Another truck pulled up behind it, then another. Within 20 minutes, there was a lineup stretching halfway down the county road. Workers got out pointing at the trench, talking into radios, pacing around confused. One guy actually walked up to my fence and yelled, "Hey man, we gotta get through." I yelled back, "Not my problem anymore." About 40 minutes later, my phone rang. Bryce. And this time, no polished corporate voice. No fake friendliness. The man sounded furious. "You're shutting down an entire development," he snapped. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when he called, which honestly made the moment even better. I said, "No, Bryce. You shut down your own development when you built on property you didn't own." Silence. Then threats started flying. Lost revenue. Contractor damages. Delays. Potential lawsuits. He sounded like a casino gambler screaming at a slot machine after losing rent money. But here's the thing. None of that mattered anymore because legally he was trapped. Without approved access, county inspectors refused additional permits for vertical construction. Financing partners started panicking. Crews had to be rescheduled. Deliveries got canceled. Every single day cost him money. Within 3 weeks, Bryce was back in court asking for emergency temporary access rights. And the judge absolutely buried him. He basically said, "You created this situation knowingly, and now you want the court to rescue you from the consequences." Request denied. After that, reality finally caught up with him. Since my property was no longer an option, Bryce had to negotiate with another landowner on the far eastern side of the development, an older retired cattle rancher named Milton Reeves who, coincidentally, disliked developers even more than I did. And Milton understood leverage perfectly. He sold Bryce a narrow strip of access land just wide enough for a legal roadway for over $90,000. Cash deal. No discounts. Plus, Bryce had to pay engineers to redesign the subdivision entrance entirely because the new route changed drainage plans and utility layouts. Months of redesign work. Permit revisions. Survey updates. Environmental reviews. The losses stacked up fast, well into six figures before the dust settled. And on top of all that, court order said the gravel crossing on my property had to be removed completely. I stood there one afternoon watching excavators scrape away every ton of stone they illegally dumped across my pasture, and I swear the irony almost made me smile. The same machines they used to take my land back in the beginning were now being used to erase every trace they'd ever touched it. By the end of summer, the field was reseeded, graded smooth again, and quiet. No trucks, no workers, no dust clouds hanging in the evening air. Just wind moving through the grass like none of it had ever happened. Except it had happened. And Bryce Tanner learned a lesson a whole lot of powerful people eventually learn the hard way. Ownership means nothing if ordinary people are too intimidated to defend it. But once somebody decides to stand their ground, money alone doesn't guarantee victory. You know, after everything settled down, people around town kept asking me the same question over and over. Was it really worth all the stress? And honestly, yeah. Absolutely. Because the fight was never just about a gravel road. It was about boundaries, legal ones, personal ones, psychological ones. Once somebody learns they can step over your line without consequences, they usually don't stop there. That's true with property disputes, HOA conflicts, bad neighbors, even family dynamics. People push as far as they think they'll tolerate. And Bryce's biggest mistake wasn't building the road. It was assuming intimidation works on everyone. According to standard procedure, developers are supposed to negotiate easements before construction starts because property rights are one of the foundations holding communities together. Doesn't matter if somebody owns a billion-dollar company or a rusty tractor. The law is supposed to apply evenly. But in real life, there's often this quiet social pressure placed on regular homeowners to be reasonable, while corporations aggressively protect every inch of their own interests. Funny how that works, right? They call it cooperation when you sacrifice something, but they call it obstruction when you defend it. And I think that's why so many people connected with this story afterward. Because deep down, most folks have experienced some version of this. Maybe not with land or construction crews, but with somebody trying to overpower them through confidence, money, status, or sheer persistence. This is a psychological trap modern society rewards all the time. Aggressive people often succeed simply because everyone else gets exhausted. They count on fatigue, embarrassment, self-doubt. They want you thinking, maybe this isn't worth the fight. The lesson here is, sometimes the moment you finally say no is the first moment the other side realizes the rules actually apply to them too. And look, I'm not pretending every conflict needs to become a legal war. Some disputes really are misunderstandings. Some neighbors work things out with one honest conversation and a handshake. But respect matters. Process matters. Consent matters. From a legal perspective, what saved me wasn't anger. It was documentation. Surveys, title reports, written notices, court orders. Feelings alone don't protect property rights. Evidence does. That's something a lot of people learn too late after trusting verbal promises from people whose priorities were never aligned with theirs in the first place. And maybe the strangest part of the whole thing is this. After Bryce finally redesigned the project and construction resumed months later from the opposite side, we never spoke again. Not once. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. Which honestly told me everything I needed to know about his character. Because decent people can admit when they crossed a line. Entitled people just get angry they weren't allowed to keep crossing it. Sometimes I still drive past that subdivision entrance on the far side of the ridge. Big stone sign out front now, decorative trees, little fountain near the gate trying real hard to look luxurious. Families live there. Kids ride bikes through streets that almost cut across my pasture permanently. And every single time I pass it, I think about how close that entire situation came to ending differently if I'd stayed quiet for just a little longer. So if there's one thing I hope people take away from this story, it's this. Never let somebody convince you your rights become inconvenient the moment they interfere with somebody else's profits. Whether it's an HOA board, a developer, a landlord, or just an arrogant neighbor with too much confidence and not enough respect. Boundaries only exist when people are willing to defend them. Anyway, that's my story. But I'm curious now, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have negotiated access for compensation or locked the gate exactly like I did? Let me know in the comments, because trust me, stories like this happen way more often than people think.